What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video I'm going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from what is honestly the worst UFC event of all time. Let's be real, not even Dana White is going to be watching this card this weekend, but if you are, you're in very good hands because I've put hours and hours and hours into researching the fights that I'm going to be talking about in this video, so I hope you're going to be able to use the information that I share with you to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash. And if you like these breakdowns, don't forget to hit the like button below and also subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to save yourself some time doing your own research on this card, you can head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. You'll find a link for that in the description below. On my website, you'll find breakdown videos for all of the prelim fights on this card, where I'll give you an overview of what to expect from the matchup, the strengths and weaknesses of both fighters. It's kind of like a strategy guide that you can use to place your own bets on the fights this weekend. Like I say, if you don't have time to do your own research. So if you find that useful, check it out, MMABettingTips.com, link in the description below. But now, let's dive into the first fight that I want to talk about in this video, which is going to be the main event between Jessica Andrade and Erin Blanchfield. Of course, Jessica Andrade stepping up on just a week's notice, or just over a week's notice, to replace Taylor Santos, who was originally scheduled to face Erin Blanchfield. And what's interesting about that is that despite the fact that Andrade is coming in on just over a week's notice, she is the favourite in this fight, although she did fight recently against Lauren Murphy. So, having performed just a few weeks ago and looking great, she's probably still in pretty good shape. We know that Andrade generally has really good cardio. Don't think I've ever really seen Andrade gassed. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Andrade is the favourite at average odds of around 1.61, which is minus 164 for an implied probability of 62%. If we take a look at the odds on Blanchfield, she is around an average of 2.40, which is going to be plus 140 for an implied probability of 42%. So Andrade is 31 years old, 5'1" with a 62-inch reach, and Blanchfield is 23 years old, 5'4" with a 68-inch reach. So a couple of notable X factors to focus on there. We can see Blanchfield's a little bit taller than Andrade and has a massive 6-inch reach advantage, which is pretty huge. Now Blanchfield isn't going to be able to use it on the feet because we know Andrade is going to have a huge advantage over Blanchfield when it comes to striking. But that 6-inch reach advantage will make it easier for Blanchfield to control Andrade on the ground, to get to those takedowns, the body lock takedowns, to hold on to Andrade on the ground when Andrade tries to scramble back up to her feet. So the reach will help Blanchfield a little on the ground, although I don't see it really impacting the fight at all on the feet because Blanchfield just doesn't have the skill set to use it. So this is an interesting stylistic matchup where you've got a very dangerous striker, one of the most skilled strikers in the division in Jessica Andrade, going up against someone that, for the most part, is just a pure grappler. So you've got two girls here who have, very specific styles of fighting. We know Blanchfield doesn't really have any striking at all. Her strengths lie on the ground. And then even though Andrade has got a bit of grappling, we know that her strength is on the feet, where she's a devastating power puncher. And one of the very few fighters in the division with legit one-shot KO power. So the real question we need to ask when thinking about this fight from a betting perspective is, what is the probability that Blanchfield is going to be able to get this fight to the ground and keep this fight on the ground? Because we know if it stays standing, Jessica Andrade is going to outstrike Blanchfield by a wide margin. And with how dangerous, how powerful, how nasty Andrade is on the feet, she's going to inflict a lot of damage to go with it. And what's interesting about this fight is that I think it's fair in saying both girls have quite big weaknesses in the area that the other is strong. So if we talk about Andrade's striking just for a second, we know that she can come forward, apply relentless pressure to her opponents and inflict big, nasty, powerful, damaging shots. We know that Blanchfield is a bit of a sitting duck on the feet. She just doesn't read her opponents particularly well. doesn't move particularly well, and has really bad striking defense. So you know that for the whole time that this fight is going to be in striking range, Blanchfield is going to be in a lot of danger, taking big damage, because she's not going to be able to defend herself against Andrade's, blitzing style of striking. And she's also not going to be able to get respect in there and back Andrade up and stop Andrade from coming forward, because she just doesn't have the technique or power in her hands to stop Andrade from coming forward. So if you think back to Andrade's performance, just last month against Lauren Murphy, and we think back to how dangerous Andrade looked on the feet, how much damage she was able to inflict, it's going to be interesting to see how Blanchfield deals with that pressure and aggression on the feet, because we've not seen her ever face anyone like Andrade that's going to be able to inflict so much damage on her when the fight is standing. It's going to be interesting. If you look at Blanchfield's past opponents, for the most part, they've been volume strikers, and the fighters she fought who hadn't been volume strikers, like Miranda Maverick, she's been able to kind of get to the ground and hold down relatively easily. So she hasn't really been made to pay yet for how bad she is defensively. But Andrade is not easy to hold down early in fights, but not impossible to hold down. Andrade is an interesting fighter because her defensive grappling is very similar to Derek Lewis's in many ways, which is, I understand, an absolutely crazy comparison to make, but just bear with me for a second. What's interesting about Andrade and Derek Lewis is that they are both very easy to take down. So both of them have very bad takedown defense. And with how good of an offensive wrestler Erin Blanchfield is, I would expect her to be able to get Jessica Andrade down. I'm not going to say easily, but I believe Blanchfield's going to be able to get this fight to the ground. What's interesting about Jessica Andrade, though, just like Derek Lewis, is that early in a fight, she's very difficult to hold down. If you guys remember Derek Lewis's fight against Sergey Spivak from just a few weeks ago, what you'll notice if you go back and watch that first round is that Spivak took Lewis down probably 5 or 6 times in that first round. And every time Spivak took Derek Lewis down, Lewis immediately popped back up to his feet. And Jessica Andrade is exactly the same. If you take Andrade down early, she could just stand back up because she's so strong that it's very, very difficult to hold her down. What's interesting about Andrade, though, is that the more you take her down, the easier it becomes to hold her down. But it's strange with Andrade because we see the same from Derek Lewis, right? The more you take him down, the longer it takes him to work back up to his feet. But that's generally because he tires out. So if you just persist with grappling and keep taking Lewis down, eventually he's going to be too tired to work his way back up to his feet, and you can hold him down and rack up tons of top control. With Jessica Andrade, she doesn't gas out and doesn't get tired, but for whatever reason, if you keep taking her down, eventually she starts to accept being on the bottom, and she starts to accept being held down, and isn't that effective at working her way back up to her feet. So stylistically, this is a really, 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 really interesting matchup. Because obviously, with it being a main event, it's a 5-rounder. And both of these girls have got really good cardio. And what we know based on past performances is that Blanchfield certainly has the offensive wrestling and grappling to take Andrade down. But we also know, based on Andrade's past performances, that Blanchfield is probably going to find it very difficult to hold Andrade down early, which means Blanchfield is going to be forced to stand in front of Andrade for decent periods of time early in the matchup. And so she's going to be eating big shots. She's going to have to get into big exchanges. She's going to take a fair bit of damage, which is something we've never really seen her have to face before. But we also know if she can weather the early storm, she can make it through those first couple of rounds and drag Andrade into the 3rd, 4th and 5th. She stands a great chance of winning this fight when she can take Andrade down and hold her down when it gets to that point in the fight that Andrade is, a lot easier to hold down. Now, that does make this a very difficult fight to predict for a couple of reasons. The first reason being, when you look at the amount of damage that Andrade was able to inflict on Lauren Murphy in just the first 2 rounds of that fight a few weeks ago, we know that Lauren Murphy's battle tested. We know she's tough as nails. She's an experienced veteran. We've seen her in wars before. We've never seen Blanchfield in that kind of fight. We don't know if Blanchfield's going to be tough enough to hang in there with Andrade and try to weather the storm to get into that 3rd, 4th and 5th round. On top of that, you don't know whether Blanchfield is going to be able to stick to the game plan of persistently grappling and chain wrestling and be very aware of the fact that if she continues to grapple hard, it will pay off at some point in the fight. We may see Blanchfield go into a defensive shell where she feels the power, she feels the strength of Andrade, and just consigns herself to the fact that she's not going to be able to get Andrade down and hold her down. Because it's very demoralizing when, you take someone down early in a fight only to see them immediately pop back up to their feet. Is Blanchfield going to have the confidence and the persistence to keep trying to chain wrestle and keep trying to take Andrade down? And will she survive long enough to even be able to implement that game plan in the first place? It's difficult to say. So this is one of those matchups where I do feel the odds on the fight are pretty accurate. The bookies have got this as roughly 60-40 in favour of Andrade. And I would agree with that because ultimately the fight starts standing. Every round starts standing. And Blanchfield is going to truly have to walk through the fire to stand any chance of winning this. The first 2 rounds in this fight, at the very least, are going to be pretty miserable for Blanchfield. She's not going to have a lot of success with her grappling, in my opinion, early. She's going to take a lot of damage. She's going to get outstruck bad. She may even get knocked out. She's that bad defensively that I think Andrade could really take her out on the feet. But then it's tough to feel super confident in Andrade because we've seen in the past that at times she is very easy to hold down. And Blanchfield's a very good grappler, a very good offensive wrestler. So for me, the odds are absolutely where they should be in terms of money line on this fight. Andrade should be the favourite because she's going to do well early. Perhaps she knocks Blanchfield out before Blanchfield gets a chance to use her grappling. Perhaps she puts Blanchfield into a defensive shell. I agree that Andrade should be the favourite. But it's very difficult to bet on Andrade in this fight, knowing how good of a grappler Blanchfield is and how much success she can have with that grappling if she can weather the early storm. So this fight, very dead for me from a betting point of view. But it is a great stylistic matchup, and I can't wait to see how it plays out. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, I do think it is very likely this fight ends inside the distance, simply because both of them are so aggressive at pursuing a finish. So, on the feet, we know that Jessica Andrade, is constantly looking for the knockout. She has big power in her shots. Everything that she throws is to try and kill you. And we know Blanchfield is very bad defensively. So there's a good chance that over 5 rounds, 25 minutes, Andrade lands the kill shot and knocks Blanchfield out. On the flip side, though, we know that Blanchfield is very aggressive with her submission game. And yes, Andrade is very skilled on the ground. She's not going to be easy to submit. She's good at defending herself. But over 5 rounds, Blanchfield will be going for the finish. So I do like this fight not to go to a decision. I don't like the odds. Very difficult to get excited by these odds. I feel that the odds kind of reflect the probability of this fight not going to a decision. So that's just my opinion on that. I won't be betting it because I don't think there's any value in the odds. But I do think fight not going to a decision is the most likely outcome, in my opinion. Now, in terms of prop bets on this one that really jumps out at me would be Andrade to win by knockout or TKO, just purely because of the damage she was able to inflict on Lauren Murphy a few weeks ago. And I think Blanchfield is very likely to have to go through the same thing that Murphy went through. But as we can see, the odds are very, very steep on that. The odds not great on Blanchfield by submission either. In terms of prop bets, I would probably give this one a miss. The odds are pretty much where they should be on this fight all across the board, in my opinion. It is a bit of a dead fight from a betting point of view, but could be a great fight from a live betting point of view. And if you're interested in live betting, there are spaces available in my live betting group at the moment. To sign up, all you need to do is come to my website, MMABettingTips.com, roll the mouse over where it says betting tips, go to live betting tips. You could sign up there, give it a try. If you don't like it, you can get a refund, no problem. But my live betting group is sold out for most of the year. We have to set a cap on the number of people in the group, because the more people that place the same bet at the same time, the faster the odds decline and become suspended. So most of the year, the live betting group is sold out. The space is currently available. If you want to join, you can. Space available now. Don't think they're going to be available for too much longer, so jump on board while you still can. Now let's break down the co-main event of this card, and I guess this kind of epitomizes how much of a bad card this is, because, I mean, how the hell is Zach Pauge versus Jordan Wright a co-main event of anything UFC related? Jordan Wright is coming into the fight on a 3-fight losing streak. Pauge lost his last fight against Mohammed Usman, and somehow these two guys are the co-main event of a UFC card. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And for me, it's a sign of how far the UFC have fallen off. This is a truly shockingly bad card. But still 11 fights for us to bet this weekend. 11 opportunities to make money. And at the end of the day, I don't care who's fighting. As long as I can make money on it, that's all that matters to me. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. Pauge is the favourite at average odds of around 1.36. Which is going to be minus 278 for an implied probability of 74%. If we take a look at the odds on Jordan Wright, he's around an average of 3.30, which is going to be plus 230 for an implied probability of 30%. So Pauge is 34 years old, 6'2" with a 76-inch reach, and Wright is 31 years old, 6'2" with a 77-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age and roughly the same size, but what is interesting is obviously this fight is taking place in the light heavyweight division, and previously we've seen Jordan Wright competing in the middleweight division, so he's stepping up to make his light heavyweight debut. And Pauge has obviously previously competed in the heavyweight division. Now, he did have fights earlier in his career at light heavyweight, but this is interesting because even though Wright and Pauge have got roughly the same wingspan at 6'2" with a 77-inch reach and 6'2" with a 76-inch reach respectively, what's super interesting about this matchup is that you've got Pauge, who's competed at heavyweight, coming down to light heavyweight, Wright, who's competed at middleweight, going up to light heavyweight, and they're kind of meeting in the middle, which is interesting. You'd think that would mean Pauge would have like a power and, you know, physicality advantage, but who knows? Who knows? Jordan Wright might look a lot better at light heavyweight. So, how do we see this fight playing out? Well, we know Jordan Wright is one of these guys who has a kill or be killed style of fighting. He's very, very aggressive, comes out the gate in round one trying to kill his opponents, and if he doesn't get the job done in round one, he inevitably adrenaline dumps, gasses out in round two, and looks absolutely awful. So just like with Blanchfield fighting Andrade this weekend, the key really is, you know, for Blanchfield making it through the early stage of the fight and dragging Andrade into the deeper rounds. It's exactly the same for Pauge. He's got to weather that early storm, hang in there, and trust in the fact that if he can just get into the second and third round, Jordan Wright will gas out where he'll become a lot more beatable. But we know based on Pauge's last fight, where he was knocked out by, literally a flash KO out of nowhere against Mohammed Usman. We know, based on that performance, that he is the kind of guy that's very susceptible to getting caught cold with big shots and KO'd. It can happen. If Usman did it, Jordan Wright can do it, because for all of Wright's weaknesses, you can't take away from the fact that he is very dangerous, he is very aggressive early. We've seen him hurt multiple guys early in fights. He's very fast, he's very explosive, he's very unpredictable, and he's very aggressive. And ultimately, when you've got a guy like Jordan Wright that does have a kill or be killed style, that does come out the gate super hard, super aggressive, takes the fight to you and forces you to exchange, it only takes one shot to knock you out. And, based on Pogues' last fight against Usman, there's nothing to suggest that Wright can't land a kill shot as well and knock him out. Especially because when you look at these two, there is a big speed difference. Wright is a lot faster than Pauge. Now, perhaps Wright isn't as fast at light heavyweight, moving up a division. Perhaps Pauge is faster at light heavyweight now that he's moving down a division. But with Jordan Wright has got that fast karate blitzing style, and Pauge's got like that traditional boxing style. It is going to be very interesting to see how these two look when they get into big exchanges, because Wright is bringing the volume, the power, the speed, the aggression, whereas Pauge much more of a single shot striker. You could really run into trouble against Wright here early. It's an interesting matchup. Now, what I do like about Pauge is that he's very well rounded, he's very solid, he's got decent cardio, decent grappling, decent boxing, and we know Wright isn't particularly good on the ground. Like I say, gasses out very quickly. After maybe a round or so, this guy's absolutely done. And we also know on top of that he's very reckless. So if Pauge's patient, if he can weather the early storm, he will likely go on to win in the second or third round of this fight. But he will have to go through the fire early on, and there will be a lot of danger for him early, when Wright comes out the gate hard like he always does. Now, there is the chance that Wright will fight a little bit safer, fight a little bit smarter, and try to pace himself over 3 rounds in this one, rather than coming out the gate so hard. I don't think it's going to happen, purely because he's never made an adjustment before. The way I look at Wright is, he's lost 4 of his last 5 in the UFC, and for the most part, he's lost all 4 fights for the same reason. He's just come out the gate too aggressive, too reckless, and he's got himself into trouble every single time. For me, if he was going to change his game plan, change his strategy, fight safer, smarter, slow the pace down a little bit, I feel he would have done it already. Now, his move up to light heavyweight could be a sign that he's making wholesale changes and he will fight safer and smarter this weekend. But, old habits die hard. Does a leopard ever change his spots? I'm not so sure. All we could do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And based on past fights, Wright is probably going to come out pretty hard in round 1, gas out in round 2, if the fight goes that far. So from a betting point of view, this fight is really difficult. I do think it's dog or pass, purely based on the fact that the odds kind of make it impossible to bet on Pauge. At the end of the day, we know that Jordan Wright's not very good. He's got tons of weaknesses, but he's also quite dangerous early. He does come out the gate very aggressive, and he could catch Pauge with something early. For me, that makes betting Pauge absolutely impossible as a big favourite. It's just too risky. We know Wright's dangerous. We know he's going to be looking to take Pauge out in round 1. So if you really, really, really want to bet this fight, I think you do have to take Jordan Wright as the underdog. But for me, there's no way I could bet on a guy like Jordan Wright, because I just wouldn't feel comfortable betting on a fighter who's probably going to be gassed very bad after round 1. For me, that's just not a strong position to put your money, and it's not personally the kind of bet that I like to take. It's an interesting fight. I think Pauge wins quite a good percentage of the time, but for me, unfortunately, his odds reflect that. There's no value there. It's an easy pass for me. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that this fight is probably not going to go to a decision. Again, the odds reflect that. The odds are pretty much where they should be. Wright probably either gets the knockout early or gasses out, and Pauge gets a finish into the second and third. For that reason, you can't really bet on the over-under on this one. The odds reflect the probability of this fight not go into a decision. So, no value there. And in terms of the prop bets, you know what? I do actually like Jordan Wright to win by knockout. 4.9 plus 390. I do think there's a good chance he catches Pogues and knocks him out early. I mean, the odds aren't that much better than betting in money line. So maybe, if you really want to bet this fight for action, just to make watching the fight more interesting, maybe just take the Jordan Wright money line. But let's be real, if Wright does win, with how bad his cardio is, it's probably going to be by knockout or TKO. So if you're one of these guys that likes to gamble for fun, gamble for entertainment, you want to place a few dollars on every fight to make watching it a little bit more interesting, I think the best bang for your buck, the best value bet I can see, probably Wright to win by knockout or TKO. But just know, if he doesn't get it in round one, your money's probably dead in the water. Anyway, I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the fight between Josh Parisian and Jamal Pogues. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Pogues is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.41, which is going to be minus 244 for an implied probability of 71%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Parisian, he's around an average of 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Parisian is 33 years old, 6'4", with a 79-inch reach, and Jamal Pogues, making his UFC debut, is 27 years old, 6'3", with a 77-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size, nothing major in age either, and not a good stylistic matchup for Josh Parisian this one, which again is reflected in the odds with Jamal Pogues being a big favourite. Now, of course, you've got all the risk factors that go into betting a UFC debutant, like octagon jitters, the increased probability of adrenaline dumping, all that kind of thing. How will Pogues look competing under the bright lights of the UFC? But to be honest, this is about as good of a stylistic matchup in the UFC as I think Pogues could hope for, because his base is wrestling. He's a reasonably good wrestler. And as we saw in Parisian's recent fight against Dontel Mays, or say recent fight, one of his recent fights, only 2 fights ago, but it was a decent amount of time ago back in 2021. But as we saw in one of Parisian's most recent fights against Mays, his takedown offense and ground game is very bad, to the point where a low-level grappler like Dontel Mays was able to trap him in a bad position on the ground and stop him with elbows from the crucifix position. So if someone on the ground as bad as Dontel Mays is able to do that to Parisian on the ground, imagine what someone with a base in wrestling like Jamal Pogues may be able to do to him. So this is one of those matchups where there's definitely issues with Pogues. I'm just not sure how well equipped Parisian is going to be to exploit them. But to be fair to Parisian, I do think he does quite well if this fight stays standing. Pogues is one of these guys that is a lot faster, a lot more athletic, and will hit a lot harder than Parisian on the feet. We know that Parisian is very slow, very bad defensively. He's a very sloppy heavyweight. But what I do like about Parisian is his toughness and persistence. We know he's one of these guys that will just keep coming forward, keep walking you down, keep forcing you to engage. And for a heavyweight, he does throw quite a high volume. Pogues, on the other hand, is very much a passive, timid, tentative, single-shot striker. So even though he will be faster, more athletic, and more technical than Parisian on the feet, I don't think he's going to be able to match Parisian's hustle and work rate. So if this fight were to stay standing, even though Parisian would for sure eat some big shots and get dinged a lot, I think he'd be tough enough to kind of hang in there with Pogues and probably outwork Pogues on the feet. Now, grappling is Pogues' biggest strength. He is primarily a grappler, he is primarily a wrestler, and Parisian's takedown defense is absolutely awful. And so the most likely outcome in this matchup is Pogues uses a grappling heavy game plan to take Parisian down and just beat him up from top position. That's the most likely outcome in this fight, and the reason why I believe Pogues is, such a big favourite. Having said that, Pogues' offensive wrestling isn't great Like, his top game's not the heaviest, his grappling control's not the strongest, and his offensive wrestling's not brilliant because most of the takedowns that he shoots come above hip height. It's, you know, not as easy to upset your opponent's balance and get them down when you're working with takedowns above hip height as it is when you're working in, you know, deep on their legs and hips. But having said that, Parisian's takedown defense is so bad that it probably won't matter. The reason why I do think Parisian could potentially cause Pogues some problems, though, is because it has been a long time since we saw his takedown defense tested. You know, last time we saw him defend takedowns was back in December 2021. So it's possible Parisian could have improved his takedown defense a lot since then. With Pogues not being the best offensive wrestler, if Parisian has improved his takedown defense a little bit, it could cause Pogues a lot of problems. Because, like I say, if this fight does stay on the feet, I do think Parisian might be able to, like, basically out-dog Pogues, because he's a tough, gritty, determined dog, and I think he can just kind of out-hustle and outwork Pogues on the feet, make it ugly, you know, make it a sloppy, scrappy, ugly heavyweight contest, and just out-hustle Pogues over the 3 rounds. Like I say, most likely outcome is Pogues using his grappling to dominate this one, but his odds kind of reflect that. And so again, this is another one of those fights where the odds are exactly where they should be. I'm not sure if I would go as far as saying this is dog or pass. With how bad Parisian's takedown defense and ground game looked against Dontel Mays, I would not want to be betting this guy in any capacity against a reasonably good MMA grappler, which Pogues is. But at the same time, Pogues' odds carry an implied probability of in that 70% ballpark, and his offensive wrestling isn't good enough for me to even be a little bit tempted to bet him in that odds range. So, yeah, again, the odds are kind of exactly where they should be. No value on either side here. I don't really know what to suggest. Do with that information whatever you want to do with it, right? So, in terms of the over-under on this one, we can see the odds are pretty much in the even money odds range for whether this fight goes to a decision or not. So, this one is actually a little bit more difficult to predict. Again, I can see why the odds on this are in the even money odds range, because Parisian isn't really a finisher. If you look at his record, you know, when Parisian does win, for the most part, it tends to be like grinding guys out. I know that he's got a lot of wins inside the distance, but these are against like really, really low level opponents who are going to be easy to finish anyway. When you look at his style, how he doesn't really have one-shot knockout power. He's more of a volume striker, and his ground game's not particularly dangerous either. And we know Pogues a decent grappler, so unlikely he has too much success on the ground. For me, if Parisian does win, it's likely a similar sort of win to what we saw from him against Roque Martinez, where he's able to keep the fight standing and he's just able to like outwork, out-hustle and outgrind Pogues over 3 rounds. I don't feel it's that likely Parisian gets a finish here. Now, when you look at Pogues' record, again, he is a bit of a decisionator. He's one of these guys that gets you down, but he's not particularly dangerous on the ground. Like, his ground and pound's not that devastating. He's not the kind of guy that will, you know, go for submissions. He kind of just, you know, wants to wear you out and chip away at you. So I never feel great betting on a heavyweight fight to go to a decision. But based on past performances, neither of these guys are that dangerous. It's tricky because Parisian, in his fight against Dontel Mays, he showed absolutely no ability to defend himself on the ground. So even though Pogues isn't that aggressive at pursuing a finish on the ground, if Mays can get a finish on the ground, you bet your ass Pogues can. It's just one of those things where I guess, again, you know what? This card is an absolute twat for betting, if I'm honest. All the odds I'm looking at, I'm like, yeah, do you know what? The odds are pretty accurate there. For me, I think it is 50-50 whether it goes to a decision or not. I wouldn't really lean either way here. So again, this is another one of those situations where the odds are exactly where they should be. Sorry to be boring, but this is just a really dead card from a betting point of view. And yeah, I could kind of see it going either way, because on one hand, neither of them are that dangerous, but then on the other hand, Parisian is so bad on the ground. You know, if Mays can get a finish on the ground, I could see Pogues getting a finish too. So it is one that could go either way. Very difficult to call. Now, in terms of prop bets on this one, again, I would say most likely outcome is probably Pogues by decision, but again, the odds are absolutely terrible. And yeah, props looking pretty dead on this fight as well, to be honest with you. Another very dead fight from a betting point of view, unfortunately. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is one of the most interesting matchups on this card, in my opinion. It is going to be William Knight against Marcin Prachnio. So as we can see, both of them are in the even money odds range, with Knight a very slight favourite at average odds of around 1.87, which is minus 115 for an implied probability of 53%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Marcin Prachnio, he's around an average of 1.95, which is going to be minus 105 for an implied probability of 51%. So this fight very close to 50-50 in the eyes of the bookies. And we can see that William Knight is 34 years old, 5'10", with a 73-inch reach. And Marcin Prachnio, 34 years old, 6'3", with a 74-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size in terms of reach, roughly the same age. Marcin Prachnio will be longer and taller than Knight, but what Knight lacks in like height, he more than makes up for in power and physicality, because he's got that small, compact, muscular frame. Now, this is a really interesting stylistic matchup, because based on my research, I believe Marcin Prachnio is better than William Knight from a technical point of view in every single aspect of MMA. But I also believe that William Knight's physicality, power and athleticism could be too much for Prachnio to handle. And so even though Prachnio has got the technical advantages, Knight may be able to negate those technical advantages and overwhelm him in a similar way that he's done to guys like, you know, Alonzo Menafield, for example. So if we talk about the different ranges in which this fight could take place. So first of all, we talk about striking. William Knight isn't the most comfortable striker. In fact, even though he's got a base in Muay Thai, he doesn't really have any boxing at all, and for the most part has got a kicks-based style of striking. His boxing tends to be him just loading up on big singular power shots and just looking to connect with a nuclear bomb that knocks you out. But he's not really a volume striker, doesn't really set his power punches up particularly well, doesn't throw combos, just very much a single shot power striker. Prachnio, on the other hand, throws a far higher volume of strikes than Knight, and while he may not have the technical kicking game that Knight does, he's certainly a better boxer than Knight. And so Prachnio will likely outstrike Knight by a decent margin on the feet, simply because he throws a lot more. Knight just doesn't really throw with much volume. Now, having said that, Prachnio's not the best defensively, so even though he will likely throw a much higher volume of strikes than William Knight will, the stuff that is going to be coming back at Prachnio from Knight is going to be a lot more damaging, a lot more impactful, and a lot more likely to knock you out. Because we know Knight is a single shot power striker with legit knockout power in his hands, whereas Prachnio much more of a volume striker. So on the feet, you've got this volume versus power dynamic where, you know, if the fight were to go the distance, Prachnio likely would outpoint Knight, but Knight's only got to land one big shot. And with how bad Prachnio is defensively, how dangerous Knight is, I could easily see him knocking Prachnio out. But I do think Prachnio is the better striker out of the two. Now, in terms of grappling, both of these are very, very bad on the ground. But We do see William Knight use a lot of grappling in his fights just because of how physically strong he is. So he uses his physicality to overwhelm guys, to try and get on top of him, where, you know, he can obviously use his power, his strength, his weight to hold him down, get some ground and pound off. Now, Prachnio's takedown defense is pretty good, but he's one of these guys that becomes pretty easy to take down if you get him tired. And Prachnio's one of these guys that no matter what pace he fights at, he does slow down a lot as fights wear on. And on top of that, the more you force him to grapple, the more you force him to defend takedowns, the faster he's going to get tired. So even though Prachnio has got the takedown defense to neutralize the threat of Knight's grappling, because Knight isn't a very good grappler, he's not a very good wrestler, what Knight can do is put money in the bank in this matchup by forcing Prachnio to defend takedowns, you know, fight him in the clinch like he did to Alonzo Menifield, and just wear Prachnio out. And if he does that, I think it's going to pay dividends later on in the fight, when Prachnio's probably going to be too tired to defend himself from Knight's power strikes on the feet, and too tired to also stop Knight from taking him down. So this is one of those interesting matchups where I think it's really going to come down to at what point in the fight Prachnio gasses. Because I think while Prachnio is fresh, he's going to be able to stuff the majority of Knight's takedowns, and he's also going to be able to outstrike Knight on the feet. But we know that Knight has got really good cardio, right? Despite his body type, Knight can still perform pretty well in round 3. It's the reason why he beat Alonzo Menifield. He was just the fresher guy in the 3rd round of the fight. So this matchup's going to come down to how hard Knight can make Prachnio work early, and at what point in the fight does Prachnio slow down. Does Prachnio slow down in the 3rd round when it's too late for Knight to win the fight, because Prachnio's got enough gas in the tank to win the 1st and 2nd round? The Knight would have to get a finish in the 3rd round in order to win, right? Because if you win 2 out of 3 rounds, you win a 29-28 decision. Or can Knight make Prachnio work hard enough to gas early in the 2nd round, which he has in the past at some occasions, which would then mean Knight could backdoor a decision and win the 2nd and 3rd round? It's difficult to say, very difficult to say, and as a result, this is another fight where I feel the odds are pretty much where they should be. Now, this matchup is in the even money odds range. So, gun to my head, if you're asking me who I think is more likely to win, I would say Marcin Prachnio. Simply because he's one of these guys that if you don't make him work really hard in round 1, his cardio will be serviceable like deeper into the 2nd round. And what we often see from Knight is he will not go super hard in round 1. He will look to kickbox a little bit and then get more aggressive as the fight progresses. That might not be the best strategy. In fact, it won't be the best strategy against Prachnio, because if you start slow against Prachnio and you don't make him work really hard in round 1, his cardio is going to hold up better deeper into the fight, which means he's going to be harder to take down in the 2nd and 3rd round, and he's still going to have that volume striking into the 2nd and 3rd round. So I do think it's more likely that Prachnio wins, just because it takes Knight a little bit of time to feel his opponent out and get going. But if you see Knight in that 1st round driving Prachnio into the cage, forcing him to defend takedowns, beating him up in the clinch, forcing him to exchange, if you see Prachnio exerting a lot of energy in round 1, Knight's probably gonna go on to do pretty well, because his cardio will hold up a lot better. So again, very difficult fight to predict. My slight lean is Prachnio, but that would all change, you know, depending on the output of Knight, you know, early on. And what I would say on top of that as well is Knight is one of these guys that obviously poses much more of a threat to Prachnio in terms of finish. So when Prachnio gets tired and he's sloppy and bad defensively, you know, we know Knight's got crazy power, right? He could easily land a shot and knock Prachnio out. Knight has shown that he's got a pretty good chin. He's tough to get out of there, and Prachnio's not the most dangerous striker. He is more of a volume striker. So, you know, I guess, again, that makes me feel a little bit less confident in Prachnio, because Knight could just land a flash KO and knock him out. All round, it's a bloody tough card for betting this. And it's another matchup where the odds are pretty much exactly where they should be. I think this is pretty much a 50-50 fight. Could go either way. My slight lean's Prachnio, but not with any amount of confidence. I would steer clear of betting this fight if I were you. Yeah, it's a very, very tough matchup for betting. In terms of the over-under on this one, because of how dangerous and aggressive Knight is, I can kind of see why fight not to go to a decision is favoured. But you know what? Both of them are pretty tough. And, you know, it's not easy to get either of them out of there. If you look at Knight's record, you know, he has gone deep in many fights. He went the distance with Grishin. Almost went the distance with Clark, went the distance with Menefield, the distance with Da Jung, distance with Alexa Camo. If you look at Prachnio's record, he's a bit of a decisionator as well. Distance with Khalil Roundtree and Philip Lins. Even though, you know, both these guys are aggressive, not the best defensively, I think fight goes to a decision, gives you the better risk to reward ratio. I'm not going to bet it personally because it's only slightly better than even money, which means you're not getting a particularly good risk-to-reward ratio on that bet when William Knight, you know, has that one-shot KO power to end Prachnio's Knight at any time. But if you do want to bet on the over-under on this one, I do think the over is the better side to go with. I think it gives you the better risk-to-reward ratio, but there's no value for me. I won't be betting it. Now, in terms of prop bets on this one, I think the best one to go for probably Prachnio by decision at odds of 5.0 plus 400, 4.50 plus 350. But again, there's lots of ways this fight could play out. It could go either way for a start, and yeah, lots of variables in this one. So for me, the props are dead as well. I wouldn't be betting the props on this. I know this is a fucking terrible video. This is a terrible breakdown video. It's terrible. I'm just saying, don't place any bets. The odds are where they should be on every fight. But that's the reality of this card. You know, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you guys. It's a terrible card with terrible fights, and you know the odds are basically exactly where they should be on all the fights we've covered so far. So yeah, I'll keep it real with you, 100%. I think, you know, smartest thing to do this weekend is probably play defense. You know, not place bets just for the sake of it because there's a UFC card. You know, and save your cash for, you know, only the bets where you find really strong positions, and I'm certainly struggling to find strong positions on this one. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Jim Miller versus Alexander Hernandez. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Alexander Hernandez is the favourite at average odds of around 1.42, which is going to be minus 238 for an implied probability of 70%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Jim Miller, he's around an average of 2.90, which is going to be plus 190 for an implied probability of 34%. So Jim Miller is 39 years old, 5'8" with a 71-inch reach, and Alexander Hernandez is 30 years old, 5'9" with a 72-inch reach. So Hernandez is also coming into this fight on short notice. Jim Miller was originally scheduled to face Gabriel Benitez. I believe Hernandez is coming into the fight on about 2 weeks' notice, which is interesting because Hernandez's cardio has never been great. So when I see a fighter like Andrade coming in on short notice, like, oh well, you know, doesn't really matter. She's always in shape. You know, never seen Andrade gas. She'll be just fine. When I see a fighter like Alexander Hernandez come in on short notice, I'm like, he'd better have been in training camp for something, because if not, you know, I mean, his cardio doesn't hold up the best of times on a full camp. Imagine what it's going to be like coming in on 2 weeks' notice. But we'll reserve judgment. Hernandez probably knows what he's doing. It's just something to bear in mind, right? Hernandez is a big favourite. We know he's got a history of gassing, and he's coming on 2 weeks' notice. That could be a recipe for disaster. Now, in terms of the other X factors, we can see that Hernandez is 9 years younger than Miller, And this is the age gap where I feel the age statistics are the absolutely most relevant. Because at 30 years old, Hernandez is absolutely in his prime, should still be making improvements from fight to fight. Whereas at 39 years old, Jim Miller is an absolute dinosaur. He is ancient for the lightweight division. Now, it's not being disrespectful to Miller. This is just a young man's game. And Miller himself knows that he's obviously way past his prime and he's going to be declining from fight to fight. It's nothing personal or specific to Miller. It's just the father time's undefeated, and that's the way it is. So we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time. 7-0 when there's a 9-year age gap in a fight. Which, interestingly, is pretty much exactly where Hernandez's odds are with the implied probability, because if we know the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 9-year age gap in a fight, isn't it funny that the implied probability on Hernandez's odds is 70%? And so when I look at a matchup like this, you never want to be blind betting on statistics like that and trends like that, but you do have to bear them in mind and take them very seriously. And if you are considering a bet on Jim Miller this weekend, all I would say is, while there are lots of reasons for betting against Hernandez, and we'll certainly talk about them, his cardio, the short notice, certainly a couple of things, as well as other things we'll get into. But the trend that, guys that are 9 years younger than their opponent win 70% of the time, that's like a very strong trend to fight against. And I feel like trying to be profitable long term, battling against that trend, is going to be a lot more difficult than betting with that trend. So that's just something for you to bear in mind if you're betting these fights this weekend. Now, in terms of their size, they're roughly the same size. But again, Jim Miller, 39 years old, his body is obviously going to be declining from fight to fight. He's been suffering from Lyme disease for many years. He's on a lot of medications to control that. He's obviously suffered with a lot of injuries throughout his career. He's got a lot of chronic injuries, a lot of nagging injuries, which will probably not be healed, coming into this fight. So, the all the X factors are kind of working against Miller in this one, aside from obviously the fact that Hernandez coming in on about 2 weeks' notice. So, how do we see this one playing out from a stylistic point of view? Well, similar to the fight between William Knight and Marcin Prachnio, the key for Miller in this one is forcing Hernandez to work hard early, because Hernandez will inevitably slow down in this matchup, but the rate at which he slows down is very much going to depend on how much energy he's forced to exert early on. The problem with this fight for Miller is that in order to make Hernandez work hard, he's going to have to put himself in a lot of danger, because Hernandez has got good footwork, good movement, he's very athletic, he's got a lot of power in his hands, and he can really hurt Miller on the feet. At 39 years old, Miller's reflexes aren't going to be what they used to be. His chin, his ability to take damage are not going to be what they used to be. And we know Hernandez is really, really vicious early on. He's got legit knockout power in everything that he throws, and he can really hurt Miller on the feet. And so this is a tricky matchup, because just like Blanchfield Andrade, just like Knight Prachnio, you've got to put yourself in danger early to then reap the rewards late on. And so Miller has got to force Hernandez to engage in this first round. He's got to force Hernandez to exert a lot of energy. If Miller just kind of stands in the octagon, in kickboxing range, and just gets into a friendly kickboxing match with Hernandez, he's going to get outstruck over 3 rounds, because Hernandez is not going to slow down enough to the point where Miller can then use his superior cardio and toughness to take over. So it's one of those fights where, again, very much going to come down to whether or not Miller's going to be able to make Hernandez work hard early. Now, there's a couple of ways that Miller can go about making Hernandez work hard, right? He can force him to engage on the feet, which is going to be very dangerous for Miller because of how hard Hernandez hits, how fast he is, how dangerous of a striker he is. The other option for Miller is to force Hernandez to grapple. And we know Miller is a decent offensive wrestler and an extremely high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Now, it will not be easy to take Hernandez down and hold him down, especially early, because Hernandez also has a base in wrestling and he's very physically strong. But if Miller could get Hernandez down, if he could take his back in a crazy scramble, something like that, I feel that's Miller's best path to victory. Because Hernandez is another one of these guys, if you force him to grapple just a little bit, he will get tired very, very quickly. But this is one of those matchups where it's difficult to bet Miller in this fight, knowing that he's got to put himself in a lot of danger in order to tire Hernandez out. And at this stage in Miller's career, it's unlikely he's going to be able to stand in there in front of Hernandez without getting knocked out. It's very, very difficult. So again, being boring, really boring on this card. This is another fight where the odds are probably exactly where they should be. If you think about, the age difference, the fact that Hernandez will only gas if he exerts a lot of energy early, the fact that he can pace himself over 3 rounds, it's tricky. Look, there's no upside in betting Hernandez at these odds. It just doesn't make any sense. It's a terrible risk to reward ratio. You've got to prep so much money for such little reward. But at the same time, betting on a 39-year-old lightweight suffers from Lyme disease, recurring broken hand injuries, lots of chronic injuries. It's on a steep decline, facing a young, hungry bull like Hernandez with legit knockout power, and who's very physically imposing, very physically strong early. I mean, I'm not exactly in love with betting Miller either here. For me, these odds are exactly where they should be. And again, I think the smartest thing to do this weekend is just save your money and wait for stronger positions to come along. This ain't it. This ain't it. So in terms of the over-under on this one, this is probably the first over-under on this card that I've considered betting. I do think that under 2.5 rounds or fight doesn't go to a decision is quite a good bet, actually, simply because I see this going one of 2 ways. I either see Jim Miller getting knocked out, or I see Hernandez gassing and Miller drowning him on the ground in rounds 2 and 3 when Hernandez is too tired to defend himself. I'd be surprised if this one went the distance, because I don't think Miller at 39 years old is going to have the durability to take Hernandez's shots for 3 rounds. I also don't think that Hernandez is going to be able to survive on the ground if Miller gets a hold of him. So I actually do like the under 2.5 rounds there, even though it's favourite odds. I'd be surprised if this one went the distance. I mean, you've only got to look at their records, right? These boys don't go to a decision too often. You can see Miller's last 3 fights have ended inside the distance. Tons of fights ended inside the distance there. You look at Hernandez's record, and only 1 of his last 6 fights have gone to a decision. So I do quite like the under on this fight. It's probably the first over-under on this card that I've considered betting. Now, in terms of props, Hernandez to win by knockout, most likely outcome, but the odds are absolutely terrible on that. Miller by submission, 6.0. It's not bad. How did Quarantillo get the finish? It was by TKO. Okay, interesting. He did get choked out by Moicano. We know Miller's got a nasty submission game. If he was to tire Hernandez out, put Hernandez in a bad position on the ground, don't have any faith in Hernandez's ability to defend himself. And you can see Miller's got a lot of submission wins on his record. But to be fair, the odds on the props are quite dead, and none of them really jumping out at me. I would probably take a pass. Oh, actually no. I do like Miller by knockout at TKO, because he might get a finish with ground and pound. When Hernandez too tired to defend himself on the ground. Although Miller does usually favour going for submission when guys are tired on the ground in his evil clutches. So, hope you found that useful. That is it for this breakdown video. If you liked it, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you very much, guys. Have a great weekend. Hope you make loads of money. And I'll be dropping a breakdown video for the fight between Tommy Fury and Jake Paul very, very soon. So keep an eye on the YouTube channel for that. Coming later this week. Nice one, guys. Have a great week. Take care. Bye.